believe it won't be the case and will bring a new inspiring perspective to our discussions. As the first speaker, I would like to invite Nina Arnhold. Nina represents the World Bank and is leading higher education operational and analytical work in South Asia. She was one of the very first persons who asked NAWA about the role of our agency in the institutional landscape of Polish higher education. Now, as the global lead for tertiary education, she is the best advisor to guide us in creating the national internationalization strategy. Nina, please share your perspectives.
Dzień dobry I dziękuję bardzo za zaproszenie. It is fantastic to be back to beautiful Gdańsk, which is for all of us who grew up in Central Europe, the city of freedom and liberty. And it is also fantastic to be at this beautiful medical university, which I had hoped to visit for quite some time. The minister this morning mentions that people come to Poland to learn about percussion instruments, but one of my friends picked Gdańsk for his postdoctoral research in biomedicine. So I've heard a lot about this institution, and I'm very happy to be here in person. I was asked to talk about higher education in developing countries in 15 minutes. Okay. That's going to be a little bit difficult. And I also want to challenge all of us because it's the way we often talk about higher education in what is called the global south. We say, okay, we are part of the developed world and these are the developing countries. I would argue that this way of thinking is often not very useful. Yes. And somebody who challenged us on this is the famous Hans Rosling, who already said in 2018, it doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about the developing world. So traditionally, when we talked about developing countries, it was about the level of industrialization, it was about questions of economic development, and to some extent also human capital. The World Bank, for which I work, as Sophia already said, doesn't really use this terminology or hasn't been using it since 2016. At least officially we don't do, but it might still come up at certain documents. Right. I will just have very few slides, and I had to take a decision what I want to show, and I decided to talk a little bit about global enrollment patterns. I know the colors are not great. I hope you can still see the graph. So what we have seen over the last 30 years is, of course, a tremendous change in terms of enrollment in tertiary education. Andrea said in the previous session that, well, we are still guided by Humboldt and it's a unity of higher education and research. And overall for the system, it's true. But we also have a variety of institutions, a very different institutional landscape. And when I grew up in Central Europe, basically, around 10% of an age cohort entered tertiary education. It was the same here in Poland. And over 30 years, we moved to a system where around half of an age cohort entered tertiary education. And I know people feel about it differently, but to me, it's a tremendous achievement. And it made the way we live and we work possible. And it was not exclusively possible with the established universities. It also meant that there was a different type of institution, which was maybe smaller, we could say more agile, and many of them were private institutions, and they help to make this happen. And I would argue that some developments, for example, in the service sector, wouldn't have been possible without this expansion. But back to the global landscape. So we see, if we look at tertiary education worldwide, around 40% of an age cohort now go into tertiary education. And at the top, we have North America, OECD countries, and Europe. And we see this is around maybe 80%, and then it's leveling off. And it is much lower still for sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Now, in what way is this going to look different in 5 or 10 years? I would predict that the main change we are going to see is South Asia. And the big country in South Asia, of course, is India, with about 1/4 of the world's population. And when I started working on India, which was 4 years ago, the enrollment rate was around 26%. We are now approaching 30%. And there's a national education policy which wants to bring 50% of young people into tertiary education. Now, when we look at this, so on the y-axis, we have the percentage of the population going into tertiary education, and we feel, well, okay, North America and Europe is on top, and then the sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are somehow at the bottom. But if we look at the next graph, we see a little bit a different picture. So if you look at the two big pieces of the pie, that's East Asia and South Asia. So already now, more than 50% of youngsters in tertiary education are in Asia. And why am I saying this? I listened attentively to the colleague from Africa who said, well, in Europe, we tend a little bit, you didn't say it exactly like this, sir, but we tend to be a little bit in our European discussion, and this is all worthwhile and important. But many of you work for international offices, and I think it's also about knowing your market. And this is your market when it comes to foreign students. So it's not the whole story, but it is part of the story. More than half of your potential incoming students are based in Asia. Okay. So to talk a little bit more about India, because as Sophia said, in the last couple of years, I worked a bit more on South Asia. India in 2022 had 1.3 million outgoing students. And out of these outgoing students, 0.46 million go to the US. So often they do their undergraduate degree in India, and then many students go to the US for their graduate degree. And what do these people do? And then we look at the left side of the slide, and it gives us a little bit an idea what people from an Indian background do in the US. They set up companies and they lead companies. In the previous session, we heard about the importance of stakeholders in the debate around microcredits, etc. I think this is absolutely essential that we look at the transition to the labor market and also how certain things which we are discussing here are perceived by the employers. Just on a side note, the current president of the World Bank is Ajay Banga, who also comes from an Indian background. And next we will hear from Susanna about UK. If I remember correctly, the UK is currently also led by a prime minister coming from an Indian background. So I picked India as maybe a little bit arbitrary example, just to remind all of us what the world outside looks like. Okay. The next one is already my last slide. Why internationalization in a global context? So we've heard a lot about this? Why do we internationalize? And I think it comes down to a very basic question. And this question is it for us or is it for them? Yes. It leads us back to the whole question of the perception of a developed world and a developing world. So if we say it is for them, then we are talking about something like aid, higher education as part of an aid consideration. We are helping people by bringing them to our countries and providing them with tertiary education. But as my previous managing director always said, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So bringing people to your country is normally much less selfless than it might appear. And if you go around in the world and you go to countries in Asia and Africa and other parts of the world, the people who are now decision makers are often born in the 1960s. They studied in the 1980s, and we can collectively consider where they studied. What was the country which brought them on board? In which country, in which language were they trained? And in which culture and ideology they were immersed. Okay, so what is internationalization about? It's about talent circulation. We talked about it, including for something which is sometimes called world-class universities. So some of the criteria of world-class universities are an international student body and international staff. It is about branch campuses, etc., quality of research. We heard about all of this. It's also about collaboration on megatrends. We might not be able to resolve some of the issues which we are collectively facing by just looking inward. So these megatrends concern demography. We already discussed this in some side conversations. We occasionally feel that in Europe we have a demographic problem. Now, this was yesterday, because tomorrow it is not a European problem. Tomorrow it's a global problem. Coming back to India, India has already reached peak baby. There will never again be more babies in India. So today we are competing for talent from our perspective of demographic decline. Tomorrow the world will compete for talent from global perspective of demographic decline. Other mega trends concern the climate agenda, the need to innovate, of course, and also geopolitical questions, as I already indicated, and as the minister also indicated. Sophia, you encouraged me also to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, but actually I'm going to skip this and maybe leave it for the discussion. I mean, we know that higher education is basically connected to all of the SDGs. SDG 4 is on education, so that's the obvious one. When UNESCO, IIEP and others work on higher education-related issues, they're normally connected to SDG 4. But without higher education, none of the SDGs can actually be reached. We also make this argument in a report which is called Steering Tertiary Education. So I didn't say a lot about the role of the World Bank in tertiary education. As you all know, the World Bank is active in many sectors. This includes tertiary education. And if we look at the portfolio of bank projects in tertiary education between 2015 and 21 alone, the volume of these tertiary education projects was over 3.8 billion. So this gives you an idea of the size of the tertiary education work of the World Bank. What I didn't add here under the why question is the whole question of internationalization for an economic purpose. And we will have Susanna talking to us in a moment from the UK perspective. And of course, UK is a master in this and many other respects. So I'm looking forward to this presentation. Again, if you want to know more about the World Bank's work in tertiary education, I recommend this report, Steering Tertiary Education, which also contains an annex on the World Bank portfolio in tertiary education. I would leave it like this. I'm ahead of time, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you, Nina. Although I'm not sure if even the representatives of World Banks keep the SDGs in their presentation, if it's a good sign. But okay, maybe we will come back to this issue. So this was a global perspective on what's going on in higher education globally. Now we will have two national perspectives from UK and from Germany. The concept where we have to balance between national goals and global responsibility is the transnational education. The UK has, I think, the most extensive experience in Europe, at least in this field. And I'm very happy to have with us Dr. Susanna Tomasi, the representative of the UK Department for Business and Trade, where she supports the delivery of the international education strategy. Please pay close attention to the presentation. You will see a lot of impressive numbers showing how higher education can bring profits. Susanna, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you. No pressure, huh? Okay, wow, that was a nice introduction. Thank you very much. I feel I'm under quite a lot of pressure to deliver and sort of make sure that you all stay awake. Okay, so hello, dzień dobry. I'm really delighted to be here. I love Gdańsk. I've been here before, I must say. I went for a long stroll last night and an excuse to come back to Gdańsk, and I'm the first one to raise my hand. So my name is Susanna Tomasi, and I'm the higher education specialist. I work for the UK Department for Business and Trade, which probably sounds a bit odd. I don't work for the Department for Education. So I was invited to talk to you about the global trends in internationalization and transnational education more specifically. So I would want to talk about why transnational education is important for us. And when I say us, I mean the UK government as well as the UK higher education sector. I will touch base on the key stakeholders, different models of education, transnational education, different delivery models. And I think what probably I should start with is the explanation what I mean by transnational education. I think the biggest problem that we tend to have when we work internationally is common language. We often use same words and they mean different things to different people. So when I talk about transnational education, in the UK context, I refer to UK programs delivered overseas. So that's quite a simple definition and I'll stick to that. Right. Okay, and I probably should have moved the slides. So that's me on the slide, my role and my title. Okay, so just to briefly explain why Department for Business and Trade, you might be wondering, what am I doing in this room? So essentially, our department was set up to deliver 4 priority outcomes, which you can see on the slide behind me. So in a nutshell, we are here to secure the UK and global prosperity by promoting and financing international trade and investment and promoting free trade. So within the department, we've got a team called International Education Team, and I'm part of this team. I look after higher education. And occasionally I tend to joke that I'm the only person across the whole UK government with my title. So, you know, if I want to stroke my own ego, I kind of say I'm the only person looking after higher education in terms of that title. So, our team essentially was set up to support a range of activities from government to government, conversations, negotiations, legislative changes. We get involved in direct business development and support for our sector working internationally, as well as for international partners and colleagues wanting to work with the UK. We get involved in market access, barriers, work. We support inwards visits, outgoing missions, events, webinars, and so on. So a lot of it, such as this event, is visible to the public, probably about 30%. The rest is behind the scenes negotiations at the government to government level. So essentially, through all these activities, we want to proactively encourage the UK sector, or higher education in my case, to grow transnational education by engaging in international work, and engaging in dialogues with countries and different organizations or stakeholders overseas. And similarly, we want to showcase the UK higher education as the first choice partner for international stakeholders. And obviously, depending on the context, there are different stakeholders that we work with. So hence my attendance here. Okay, so our Department for Business and Trade, along with Department for Education, was involved in establishing or creating international education strategy. So UK International Education Strategy, which was established in 2019. And since then, we have had a number of updates. We are currently working on the update for this year. So obviously hearing the earlier conversation about the national international strategy that Poland is planning to introduce was super interesting for me, because we've been through a similar discussion a few years ago. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the international strategy, because that's not really why I was invited to come here. Essentially, all I want to say is that this provides a really interesting framework for us and for the whole sector and all UK stakeholders in terms of their international development and work overseas. So I would like to focus on the UK transnational education, or as we commonly call it, TNE. We love abbreviations, so TNE is my life. I like to think, and hopefully you agree with me, that the UK is a world leader when it comes to transnational education. It would be nice to see, obviously, statistics to support that. And there are different ways to kind of look at transnational education, whether it's number of overseas campuses, numbers of students enrolled on transnational education programs, or any kind of any other parameters. And the UK higher education sector makes a significant contribution to the overall education export figures, which are outlined in the strategy. So essentially, transnational education is a big part of international UK international education strategy, which is why I wanted to sort of flag it up to you earlier on. So in terms of our department and the context of TNE, we work very closely, and when I say we, I mean the whole team that I'm part of. We work very closely to support and promote diversification and sustainable growth. And I want to highlight these two words: diversification and sustainable growth. I think it's quite easily to focus on one specific activity or one specific market. And I think it really is important that our sector works across different markets with different stakeholders, supporting different projects in different subject areas and at different levels. I think it's fair to say that our international strategy is pretty ambitious. Yet, and although our sector is seen as global leader, we tend to say that, you know, it's a big world and there are competitors around us. Now, we can probably have quite an interesting debate. Should we use this word, competitors? You know, perhaps we are friends. So we can have the conversation over tea and coffee later on. I would simply say that what we advise our sector and our colleagues across the sector is that they should be proactive, even in markets where they feel quite confident, even in markets where we have strong presence, because education is a very dynamic field. And if you look at trends, they tend to change quite frequently around the world. So when you look at the slide, I put some stats on the slide. Hopefully you can see them. They are quite impressive for our sectors. About, well, not about, 162 UK universities report students enrolled on TNE programs. So that's approximately 80% of the sector. And in 2021-22 academic year, they reported over 500,000 of students studying on UK programs overseas. I think that's quite impressive, and that's why this is so important for the UK government. Obviously, it's soft power as well as many other benefits. Our providers are involved in a number of different models, different TNE models that may be online delivery, it may be partnerships with local providers, it may be overseas campuses. Probably overseas campuses are the most visible model of transnational education, although it is, in our case, the smallest. So only about 7% of TNE students are registered across overseas branch campuses. The rest are roughly equally split between online delivery and partnerships with local providers. And one more thing I wanted to flag up is that I think the pandemic had a very significant impact on how we see transnational education and internationalization more generally, because borders were shut. So many countries stopped their citizens either leaving or people coming in. In our experience, in the UK context, universities with international links were the winners because they were able to quickly adapt and use their branch campuses or their local partners and continue international kind of activities. And post-pandemic, we have seen in our department a high level of inquiries and requests for support when it comes to development and expansion of TNE. So I was going to talk about why transnational education, and I realized that, quite frankly, 15 minutes that were allocated to me is not going to be enough. So I'll probably leave you with this slide, if you can read it, because fonts are quite small. There are plenty of benefits of transnational education. So all I want to flag up really for context is that at the very high level, TNE or transnational education can add the economic and reputational value to both partners or multiple partners, depending on the model, how you work. And I think it is really essential that they are developed in a strategic and sustainable way. And that has to take under consideration institutional capabilities and values. I think that's really important. And I think this way transnational education partnerships can make a significant contribution to education, research, and obviously cultural environment of their host countries. They have to be contextualized. They have to take under consideration the needs of the host nation, partners, and also the context of the programs that are part of transnational education arrangements. And I also want to flag up that in my experience, and I am a practitioner, I used to deal with that for 18 years, one size doesn't fit all. And it is actually quite common when you look at UK transnational education for UK university to have, say, 2, 3, 4 partnerships in the same country. And each partnership will be different because each institution, each local partner is different. So it is really, really important to contextualize your activities. You cannot copy and paste your approach when it comes to TNE. Okay, so I thought that would be a bit cheeky and also look at TNE in Poland. So I used to manage a partnership with a Polish partner when I was still part of the sector, and it was really interesting experience. I think it's fair to say that the UK TNE in Poland is not particularly big. We are talking about 700 students, I think. It is quite limited. And I think historically it was probably something to do with the fact that it was super easy for Polish students to come to the UK. They had easy access to student loans, and that was the easiest way to obtain a UK degree. Obviously, things have changed post-Brexit, and we are seeing a slow increase in terms of student numbers. And in my experience in the past, UK TNE programs in Poland ironically used to attract international students who were keen to study in Poland, but they weren't that keen to come to the UK for different reasons. So that was actually really interesting. In those days, about 80-90% of students that I used to interact with were foreign students living in Poland. And when I checked the website of the Polish Ministry of Science and Higher Education, I've noticed that 14 Polish universities have licenses to operate internationally. But what was quite intriguing for me was that most of them are private. Again, it's just an observation. It would be really interesting for me to learn a bit more about it. I couldn't find any more information about it on the website. So just to kind of wrap it up, whether we like it or not, I think the competition is there. And you may not like the word competition, but the point is students have choice. They can study here, they can study somewhere else. They vote with their feet. And it's all about kind of their financial abilities and their interests in terms of what they want to study and where they want to study. Poland and Polish universities have changed. There's much more teaching in English and other foreign languages, obviously. Poland is becoming a key player across the European Union when it comes to international student recruitment and internationalization. It's a fantastic country. It's a safe country. It's quite cheap in comparison. I hope you don't mind me saying that. In comparison to other countries across European Union, it's possible to find jobs here. And guys, the weather is predictable. So what not to like, right? I think we can work solo, right? We can all work internationally on our own, but we can be so much more powerful if we work in partnerships. And I think transnational education can enrich the efforts of UK universities that want to work internationally, that want to attract international students, international staff, international researchers. I think we are stronger working together. So just to wrap it up, I wanted to share a very quick example that you may not be familiar with. We had recently a new development partnership between UK Lancaster University, that by the way has a campus in Germany, who signed an agreement with Australian Deakin University, and they set up a joint campus in Indonesia. Might sound a bit kind of far away. My point is, we tend to look at Australia as a competitor. Yet, two universities managed to work together and find a fantastic partnership, which I think will really be very fruitful. I think, it gives us an added advantage when we work together. So that is it. I'll stop now. My time has come to an end. We've got fantastic speakers lined up, and I would love to talk to colleagues who are here and hear about their experience of internationalization. And it's great to see some familiar faces too. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, for showing us, I think, a bit different world. I think now for us it's quite obvious why TNE is in business and trade department, and why you are working there also. And now we move forward to the German DAAD, the best benchmark and the most important partner for NAVA. Dr. Kai Six, the Secretary General of the German Academic Exchange Service, will present to us what is changing in the mobility patterns and what is changing in Germany. Please, Kai, the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's actually my first time in Gdańsk, so I'm really glad that you gave me the opportunity to come here and get to know this beautiful city. It's wonderful. And it's also very timely to talk to you about internationalization strategies, since our ministries for research and education on the state level, the federal level, and on the national level are also at this very moment piling up a new strategy for the internationalization of higher education. And we do the same as DAAD right now because we turn 100 next year, and we thought that it would be nice to have a new strategy in our anniversary year. And so it's all strategies are all over the place. I'm really very fond of learning here from your perspectives. And yeah, and thanks again to our close sister organization NAVA for having us here. I will have a whole series of slides that I will show you, probably too many. But it's actually all coming down to 3 points I would like to make, 3 trends that we observe in Germany right now, and and then I will also talk about a little bit about what follows from these trends when it comes to our strategic considerations right at this very moment. And I start immediately. So this is the first trend that we observe, that global student mobility continues to be on the rise, and that countries like Germany and also Poland benefit from this trend. You can see here the overall development of international student involvement, not higher education involvement, but international student involvement. And we see that in 2021, more than 6.4 million students were enrolled outside their home countries. According to UNESCO, it's an immense increase over the past 40 years, and even since 2011, it's an increase of almost 60%. But we also see, and this trend continues, seems to continue, that there's a certain stagnation, also the flattening of the curve. So it's not sure that the kind of the increase of student mobility worldwide will continue like it has been over the last 40 years. So students are literally mobile all over the world, but with heavy asymmetries with regard to where they come from and where they go. The largest flows of international students, student mobility lead from a key country, China, now also India, to the US, but also to other countries like the United Kingdom, heard about that, Australia and Canada. And at DAAD, we are delighted that Germany has become also an increasingly interesting country of destination. Recent numbers from UNESCO show that Germany is now the 3rd most popular destination for international students and the first non-English speaking country directly behind the US and the UK. And now I will go a bit deeper to the German situation here. You see that the number of international students in Germany has increased significantly over the past years as well, similar to the overall trend. They now account for 12.6% of all students in Germany, which is quite a bit above the average in the OECD comparison. I think in OECD, average is 6% international students. In OECD countries, in Germany, it's almost 13%. India is now the key country, is the country with the most international students in Germany, with around 42,000. But it has only last year overhauled China. I think we also have approximately 40,000 Chinese students in Germany. But compared to the numbers of Chinese and Indian students in the US or in the UK, these are still relatively small numbers, and particularly the Indian students, there's an exponential growth still going on. And we see this also from visa applications. And the third important country of origin is Syria, with approximately 15,000 students in Germany. So interestingly, there is a broad consensus in between the basically all political parties and the sector in Germany that these numbers are positive and that they are very welcome. And this is also interesting and remarkable if you compare this to the debates in other countries right now. but this consensus is still there and quite solid, I would say. So they are welcome because they enrich German universities, German societies, and you heard of some of these things before. They contribute to internationalization at home at German universities. And once they returned to their home countries, they also often serve as partners, points of contact for science, also politics and society at large, so business. So many reasons, but these were more the traditional reasons for why Germany engaged in getting more international students. And for the past few years now, we've also more and more been talking about another aspect. The minister this morning already mentioned the economic dimension of international student mobility, and that becomes more and more important as in Germany as well. So we do see that we are also in a particularly good position to retain international talent in Germany. Some more numbers here: 45% of the first-year graduates, first-year students from 2010 still were in the country, in Germany, 10 years later. And recent figures suggest that the tendency to stay has even increased since then. So this which makes Germany, together with the United States and Canada, the most successful country in this regard in retaining international students, which is good news, and it's also welcomed by, I would also say, German politics, economy, and the sector. Particularly given the lack of skilled labor in Germany right now, situation that we share with many countries in Europe. So what follows from this 4-hour strategy? I would say we have two goals with regard to international students in Germany. First one is uphold the quantity. Second one is improve the quality. Very easy. And these goals come with many sub-measures and sub-goals, which we have identified, and I've just written down 4 of them here. We do have difficulties with our visa procedures. They take much too long, and sometimes students get a visa when they should have completed their studies in Germany. And so this is definitely a thing we have to work on. We are very willing, also universities in Germany are very willing to expand their English language study programs. So there are already many study programs in English on the graduate, on the master level and PhD, of course, but not so much on the undergraduate level yet. And I think this will be the next big step and will be of the priorities in our next in our strategies. We also need to work on the success of the international students, because we see that they are much less often successful and ending the studies successfully than German students or domestic students. And overall, we made a whole series of surveys which all told us the same thing, which is the better international students are integrated, the more they feel well in the society, in the university, the bigger is the chance that they stay and that they that they also succeed at the university and also in their careers. And so integration, including offering housing opportunities and all these things, is definitely a very important aspect. So we have tackled these challenges quite recently. DAD set up a large initiative for our a large initiative where we now support more than 100 German universities with a program that we call the Initiative on Gaining and Retaining International Talent, through which universities can offer all kinds of integration measures and local networking for international students, so as to reach some of these goals that I mentioned before. So this was the first point I wanted to make. We'll be quicker with the other ones. So the second one is not as positive regarding the numbers as the first one from a German perspective. It reads German, and I think it's also correct to say also European students are not going abroad like before. Many of our students are not reached by traditional mobility programs and formats. And also have 2 slides here to illustrate this. This is a slide that shows the overall enrollment of Germans abroad over the past 40 years, 30 to 40 years. And you see it's also a stagnation or a small decline starting in 2010. And this is even more significant if you see the exchange students here, where we had a peak in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And since then, the share of German students who go abroad for a non-degree seeking stay has definitely declined since then. And we also see that this is a trend that has, of course, been fortified through the pandemic, but it's even after now all the travel restrictions ended, we see that this trend is going to continue, unfortunately. So, which brings me to our next strategic priority for the years to come, which is we need to increase access to international academic exchange by opening up the existing programs also to students who are not able to participate in these existing programs, and also by developing new and more flexible formats that are easier to access than the existing ones. Two short examples here. First step we take here is that we try to strengthen the diversity among the students in our DAD scholarship programs. We have a whole series of measures that we are now going to take, from encouraging students from different backgrounds to apply for scholarships, to running through our selection processes in order to check whether we still maintain any implicit or explicit discriminatory practices in the selection. But we also set up and will continue to set up incentives for students that are underrepresented in our programs when it comes to international exchange, for example, through financial top-ups that we give out for students with physical disabilities or chronic diseases, for students with children, and also for students from a non-academic background. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is all over the place. And the other aspect I wanted to mention here, in order to create new access to international exchange, we will also try to further strengthen digital study programs. Of course, we all learned during the pandemic that digital collaboration cannot substitute physical encounters completely. And of course, we always ask this with a more conservative German audience, whether we would like to substitute all physical encounters through digital exchange, which is of course not the case. But I think the digital and blended formats can further enrich and internationalize the learning experiences of students at our home institutions, also a kind of a internationalization at home, and they can generate easy access to international collaboration for students for whom a longer stay abroad is not yet an option. To support this, we came up with a program which we called International Virtual Academic Collaboration, which provided funding to German universities to set up joint digital teaching modules and courses together with international partners, also many of them from Poland. And very lately, IVEC also inspired us to set up a program that we call Ukraine Digital, a funding program related to the recovery of the Ukrainian higher education system, where we partner up German universities or university departments with Ukrainian counterparts. And through digital support, we try to help them to keep up their study offerings to Ukrainian students. Which then takes me to the last point I would like to make, and which shortly delves into the geopolitical shifts and turbulences which we are all experiencing now. And we see that these crises impact our thinking about international academic exchange and mobility, but also the mobility itself. And here I would like to only briefly highlight one very particular aspect of this complex. I think we could talk a lot about how geopolitical things that happen affect our work. But here I would like to only want to mention one particular point that is very important, or has become very important to DID, which is related to the rising number of refugees and students at risk worldwide, so students who are denied access to education, higher education in the world. I would briefly start with the UN Migration Pact from 2018, where that was which called to enhanced availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration and to invest in skills development. And it was already said by then that study scholarships would be for refugees would be exactly such a safe way, a complementary pathway to a third country. And in 2019, the UNHCR announced the 15 by 30 target, which aims to enroll 15% of refugees worldwide in higher education by 2030. Well, that's the UNHCR goal. At that time, when they announced this, there were only 1% of refugees being enrolled in higher education programs. And by the time now, we have reached 7%. So quite a successful initiative, I'd say. And we try to contribute to this goal, and we'll continue to try this, and we'll enforce our ambitions here also by a whole set of programs, particularly directed to students at risk, whom we offer shelter at a German university through scholarships that we give out. But also are we giving or building scholarship programs in third countries, in neighboring countries. We have one in Afghanistan, neighboring countries of Afghanistan, for example, where we offer scholarships to several thousand Afghan women to study in a neighboring country. We have such a program together with European partners in Myanmar and the neighboring countries where we offer opportunities to study there in Myanmar. So this is definitely one field of action that we would like to enforce in the coming years. And I stop here and hope I could make my 3 points. Thank you very much for the attention and also to this.
Thank you, Kai, for sharing your trends with us. And now we come back to the global perspective, not connected to any national perspective. Would like to invite Sebastian Streit, an expert in higher education and research at Sirius Academic, a consulting firm fully owned by the not-profit foundation. I met Sebastian during a fantastic event for Ukrainian prorectors responsible for internationalization, organized by the academic Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Is anybody here from? Okay, Rektor Witkowski, nice. And I must say, yesterday when I got to Sebastian's presentation, I thought, okay, lucky us that Sebastian is the last speaker in this session, because if not, maybe some people from the podium would like to leave the room. And good that we have no participants from France, because they would also like probably to leave our conference. So you will now discover why.
Dziękuję, Sophia, and thank you all. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here in Gdańsk with you. I often tell universities that if they want to understand the future, they should look at what is happening in Poland. In France and Germany, most still think that student numbers will continue to increase and that the challenges they face are purely incremental. Here, you've lost 1/3 of your students in the last 10 years. And you've been confronted by the massive arrival of Ukrainian students following the return of war to Europe. The way you're addressing these challenges is really remarkable, but I think there will be many more challenges ahead. And I'll just give 2 examples. One is you've lost 1/3 of your students, but you've had very few closures or mergers of public universities yet. This will change. And the second one is that although you have 8% of international students about today, as you can see on the graph, if you remove Ukrainian and Belarusian students, you actually have very few international students today in Poland. Student mobility is not new. In the medieval period, universities were global institutions competing to attract students and scholars around Europe. Here in Poland, in the 15th century, in Jagiellonian University, 44% of students were foreign in the 15th century. To give you another very different example, in 1906, when the Americans did the first ranking of universities, they listed the 1,000 top US scholars by university of graduation. The top university for US scholars where they'd done their graduate studies was Berlin, not a US university. Throughout much of history, the concept of foreign students actually made no sense because universities had no deep relation with the state in which they were situated. You have three examples here. Every medieval university had a different definition of nations. So in Oxford, you came from north of the River Trent or south of the River Trent. And obviously that did not correspond to a country or to a language. Yet that was your identity in the university. The idea of universities depending on state is a very modern one. It's 19th century. Here in Gdańsk, I would say that it's even more recent. It's after the tragic events of the 1930s. The moment when student and staff mobility again came back to the fore, I think it's well symbolized by an event which happened around 20 years ago, and which was the publication of the Shanghai rankings. Actually, these weren't conceived as a ranking. This was the vice rector of Jiaotong University who wanted to know where to send his students. And Harvard, yes, but is the Medical University of Gdańsk good or not? How can I know? That's the question he had. He asked a student of his, Ying Cheng, to do a study. The student did a very good study. The rector said, this is amazing, showed it to the other C9 rectors and put it on their website. In the US, professors in Harvard said, look, the Chinese say that we're the best in the world. In France, total panic started because they realized they were not the best in the world. France, if I come over to France, is a very elitist, has a very elitist higher education system where the most prestigious institutions are actually not universities, but grandes écoles. Yet, by 2013, the director of Polytechnique told me that the best French students were no longer coming to his institution. And the director of the École Normale Supérieure said that he had not been able to hire a world-class scholar for the last 5 years. What was happening was quite simple. The globalization of higher education was causing the collapse of the French system of higher education. The way individual students and individual members of staff looked at the world had dramatically shifted. Their perspective had become first global and only then national. And this is what forced the French government to radically change policy and approach in terms of higher education and research. Globally, of course, student mobility remains deeply hierarchical. Those who are best or have most money go to the Anglophone world and then on down. And compare the first graph where you saw international students coming to Poland from country of origin, and here you have Polish students leaving Poland to go abroad. You don't have a single country in common between those two graphs. This, of course, is true not only at an international level, but within each country. So I guess that you have students in the Bigos Medical Academy who want to transfer to Gdańsk Medical University, but you probably have very few students from the Gdańsk Medical University who want to transfer to Bigos. However, this reality is not immutable. It's not unchangeable. And this is what Sophia was mentioning about this. France and Germany, we still think that they're heavyweights of European higher education and research. Yet today, they're the worst performing countries in Europe on most indicators. Once you normalize by population or you normalize by money put into the system. Last year, nearly 30,000 German students left to study in the Netherlands. 450 Dutch students left to study in Germany. That gives you an idea of the unbalance. On Horizon 2020, both countries lost over 1 billion euros in terms of money put in and money brought in. There are many reasons for this. One of the main ones is cultural. Globalization has happened around Anglo-Saxon systems, not around the German or the French or the Japanese system. And still today, France and Germany, many people think that they remain at the center of the world, and they no longer are. For internationalization to work, universities have to become global in spirit. Otherwise, it's doomed to fail. On the right, you have the evolution of the global share of publications and citations, which highlights, I think, two very interesting factors. First, the domination of the UK and the US will not last forever. And second, the dramatic situation for France, Germany, and Japan over the last 20 years. Of course, English-speaking countries still have a massive advantage because globalization happened around. However, this too will not last forever. Recently, I was at a British business school, one of the leading ones. They had just taken two decisions. First, to cancel compulsory studying abroad for their students in international management. Why? Because UK students do not want to go abroad to study. And secondly, to launch a big campaign on British excellence for the world in their campuses in countries which were former colonies like South Africa. When I saw that, I realized why Brexit had happened. The case of campuses abroad is fascinating. We did a study for a University of Technology who had opened a campus. They were very proud in China, in Shanghai. And we looked at the Chinese students studying there. The Chinese students studying in the international campus were those who did not have good enough results to go to the to the Chinese departments of the Chinese universities. They went to the international campus because they hoped to then transfer to the purely Chinese university, which is far more prestigious. We also worked with one of the global leading business schools who had a campus in Singapore, opened a campus and realized that despite attracting the best students in Europe, there they were only attracting students who were not accepted by the universities from Singapore. These examples show how difficult questions of internationalization are. Too often, we hide them under clever marketing. And sometimes this clever marketing actually becomes a massive ethical problem. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. Yes, first, changing rankings, moving from Shanghai to Times Higher Education and QS. If you take Times Higher Education and you look at the most international university and international student numbers, you'll come across a place called the Royal College of Academics. What is that? It's a place in Luxembourg. Well, actually, all the staff are stock images. They do not exist. The headquarters is a house in the banlieue of Luxembourg. And what this institution does is that it sells MOOC, which are free on edX, for €850 to students from the global south, from the rest of the world. Here you've got an example of a MOOC from the MIT being resold illegally for €850. Yet this place is the leading one in Times Higher Education under that criterion. And Times Higher Education is usually used by most governments worldwide as a reference point of how we should think about internationalization. And for me, that is really dramatic. To give you another example, this is a different one, but it's also significant. Here you have the top 10 universities. I was having dinner with the vice chancellor of one of these universities a few years ago. And we drank a few bottles of wine. And at the end of the dinner, he told me, you know, Sebastian, what our true strategy is? Our true strategy is simple. We're creating undergraduate courses in the humanities because they're cheap. We're marking them to students abroad because they pay massive amounts of money. We're transferring this money specifically to astrophysics and medicine because they publish articles with high impact so that we can stay in the top 10 in the world, because that is our only true indicator. And we claim to be a civic university serving society. And he said, and sometimes I can't go to sleep at night when I'm confronting what the reality of my university has become. So, just to finish on a more optimistic note, the first exchange I had with a Polish university was around 2015 in Maria Sklodowska's old lab in Paris. It was with Jean Chambaz, the rector of Sorbonne University. He was worried about Europe, about the future of Europe, and he was wondering what universities could do. And he took a very simple example. He said, today, winners of an ERC, or the best students in Poland or in the Czech Republic, they come to Sorbonne or to Heidelberg, but the reverse is not true. Our aim is that in 15 years' time, the reverse will happen. In other words, how can we ensure that today's Pierre Curie will take the name of Pierre Sklodowska and move to Warsaw rather than vice versa? And this ideal is what led them to create 4EU+, actually, which is now a European university, but this was before the call was published, before the call started. And we had some examples of European universities, a wonderful session this morning. I think that they are an example of a new type of approach to student mobility, to internationalization, which involves integrating strategy at a supranational level. You're not competing with other universities or other countries. You're competing as a network with other networks, and all these networks are European or ideally global. And this changes because you move from a zero-sum game to a world in which student mobility improves the outcome for all because the networks are at a European or a global scale. Imagine you have a student in Gdańsk and you can join today's CEU or Enhance, and it changes everything because you no longer join a Polish university, but you join a global university. You can spend here a year, then move to Germany, then to Spain. And a French or an Irish student will do the same, and they will come to Gdańsk, naturally, because it's part of their course, because it's part of their study. And then, of course, when they come here, they'll realize how wonderful it is, and they'll want to stay. This can work for any university, not only European universities, but it requires governments to radically change existing rules and regulations and to rethink incentives, to rethink the way they think about policy in higher education and research. And this is what you need to work on. And if you allow me to finish on a more emotional tone, after spending 6 hours on Saturday in the amazing Second World War Museum here in Gdańsk, and with the news from Ukraine coming in, I think this should be our priority as Europeans if we want Europe to survive and to thrive. To paraphrase Chekhov, and I use Chekhov not Chekhov as a Russian, but Chekhov as a global citizen who studied in Greek and was born a Malorus and married the Sakhalin gypsies. National universities are not universities. It is our responsibility as individuals, governments, and universities to defend and promote a new model of higher education and research, which is first and foremost European and hopefully in the future global. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I was observing if nobody is leaving the room, but nobody left, so I'm happy. And maybe now I will ask the audience how many. I mean, does anybody have a question now to our speakers, just to know how many time do we have? Probably, I promise our presenters that they will have time to comment each other presentations. But if we have a lot of questions from the public, maybe it's better to talk with the audience. So could you raise your hands if anybody has a question? We have one question from the chat. There are some questions. Okay, so first question.
Hello, Alexander Shushner, University of Rijeka from Croatia. Just a simple question about a difficult topic for Mr. Kajsix, who presented this interesting graph of declining outgoing mobility in Germany. And I mean, the decline has been quite dramatic. I mean, I was surprised to see that the numbers are back to early 90s, right? So I was just wondering, I guess you did some kind of analysis on the causes of this. So if you can share that, I think it would be very interesting to hear.
Of course, thank you for the question. I think you have to relate this chart somehow to the overall increase of tertiary students in Germany. So that then you can see that the share of students who go abroad is declining. The absolute number is kind of stable. Now, it's also declining a little bit, but it's kind of stable. But the overall number of tertiary education students in Germany has increased so much over the past 15 years that this kind of did not keep pace. The ability or the willingness or to go abroad did not keep pace with this rise. So why is that? I mean, our answer would be that the group of students or the student bodies at German universities are much more diverse now than they have been 15 to 20 years before. And that our traditional offerings, which are still mostly oriented towards half a year or 1 year stays abroad, do not work as well with this diversity as they did like 50 to 20 years ago with these student bodies back then. And I think we have to adapt to this new reality and come up with more, as I said, with more flexible programs, particularly also more short-term, more blended opportunities. And I agree with Sebastian that the European University Alliances offer many good options here because they kind of integrate students into a structure of a network where going abroad physically or not comes quite natural to them.
Thank you. And now I will read the question from the chat, as we promised that we will involve our internauts. When we talk about trends and mobility, shouldn't we also more open up to academic exchanges with non-democratic and authoritarian countries in the near future to help them in democratization? I'm thinking of Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, North Korea, Afghanistan, Laos, Myanmar, and Russia and Belarus. Okay. volunteer for this question? You can just say yes or no. It's enough. You don't have to elaborate.
I think this is very much a question to the national level. I don't think that the World Bank has a position on this. I can give my personal opinion on this. I mean, as I mentioned in my talk, people who are now key administrators in many countries of the global south studied in the Soviet Union. They studied in Russian. This is, I see you, Mr. Ambassador, nodding. That's a reality. If you go to these countries, you will talk to people and they say, oh yes, I had a great time in Kharkiv. I had a great time in Moscow. They developed a certain understanding for a way of thinking through their studies. You know this. We all feel indebted to our academic teachers, to our doctoral supervisors, etc. So I'm not coming out on either side on this question, but I think it is an absolutely valid question, and I think this is what we mean by geopolitical considerations in this context. How do we position ourselves in this context? And with this, I would hand over to the national level.
I mean, in general, I think that we should not keep people or students hostage for their governments, which we do not like. So, on a very broad level, I absolutely agree that we should keep up academic exchange as long as we can. But in reality, there are also limits to this approach. I mean, I'll give you the example of Afghanistan. DAD had been active in Afghanistan 20 years, from 2001 to 21. Very active, building a lot of universities there, sending staff there, educating Afghan university staff in Germany. So really, really many millions of euros that we invested in this education. And this was all coming to an end in 21 because we were just not allowed any longer to be in the country, and we would would have risked the lives of students who or scholars who were affiliated to us, which we did not want, of course. And so what we did is we completely went out of the country, of course, but we tried to keep up our engagement for Afghan students who had to flee the country. And for Afghan students who came to Germany or were in Germany back at the time and couldn't go back. And so I think this kind of science diplomacy, it does never end, but it then also is often a question of which instruments you apply. And working in countries like Afghanistan or North Korea, it's just politically or for security reasons, for us, it's not possible.
Anybody else? Or we can move. Yeah, Susanne.
So I guess a small disclaimer: personal views and not views from my department. I liked what you said, and I think it's really important to highlight that physical engagement in some of the countries that were listed in the question is just not possible due to security reasons. And we have duty of care in terms of our staff and students traveling, whether it's Afghanistan or Czech Republic or France or Germany, you know. I think there is an alternative, and certainly on the UK side, a lot has been done to, for example, offer online provision. So we have high level of provision, for example, in Afghanistan, because there is internet connection, patchy in places, but there is internet connection. So, for example, through micro-credentials, small bite-size programs and courses, students can still access qualifications, whether it's subject related or language provision. We have various projects, and I'm again thinking Afghanistan, since that was mentioned by you, Kai, for refugees. And obviously some are in the UK, some are in neighboring countries. So our sector has engaged quite heavily in a number of different projects. And I thought I would also flag up the great work that our British Council is doing. So that might not be technically or strictly speaking academic full qualifications because they don't have degree awarding powers. They do, however, run cultural programs and language programs. And I think sometimes you have to start from a very small scale projects and then kind of grow and expand them because times are changing. And frankly, you know, we can build bridges through education, sort of baby steps. And we have, as you mentioned, you know, we have history of building bridges and positive results through small projects. And I think, you know, hopefully most of those regimes will not last, and we'll see kind of changes in the future. But as I said, these are very much my personal views rather than sort of views of my employer.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zophius. I want to, this is not protocol, but really I want to congratulate and thank all the panelists. You've given us the best we could expect, at least as far as I'm concerned. If they can give you another round of applause, I wouldn't complain. So, but that said, I wanted to come to two things. One, on the perspective that Dr. Susanna brought in, looking at education, but also policy-wise, bringing out to visualizing what we get, what we gain, and even using terms of export of education, how much money, how much people, and I understand how much people is also how much of soft power and all that. And also Sebastian, who brought in a perspective of downfalls and increases, and the whole from the older times, the geopolitical considerations around education. So I wanted to come to what Dr. Nina has said and say that actually what we seems to be a cost in investment on education anywhere in the world might be otherwise seen as a benefit in a time perspective. So why am I saying this? I know maybe I reduced it from my country. We might look at some parts of the world and we see more problems and education as costly, but actually it's a long-term investment. If I look, I take my country, Rwanda, as a case. Dr. Nina said we always have that kind of connection to our old professor. So for those who don't know, I studied here in this city as well, long time ago. So that's why that connection is always there. But I can tell you, Rwanda is not a big country. But if you look at how many students we have here in this country, I think we must be among the top 10 in terms of numbers in Poland. But if you look at Rwanda alone, Poland has been the top best destination for Rwandan young students aspiring to study abroad. Top best for the last 3-4 years. So, and before Poland, we have had...
For interrupting, but there is only one reason. It's you.
No, it's not.
It's the ambassador doing his job here.
But the reason is whatever it comes, it has become a new reality. If you have a country somewhere that is small but counts near 2,000 students, close to all of them, private, paying their fees, paying their housing, coming to such a country, and it might go along. I know that in the last 15 years, the top best have been 3 countries before Poland: the US, after South Africa, and after the US, there was China. But now Poland has taken it over, and I don't think any of those countries has kept it as long as Poland is keeping it. So I wish you could keep keeping it. Now, I'm saying this in regard to what Nina showed us in time perspective, but also you can consider that in terms of internationalization, but also current investment and the future investment in both ways. And for this, I know what I didn't say is what Carl said. The issues of visa, the issues of difficulties to move in. As much as we talk about students, and I will end there, I would wish to see and to know if in terms of this internationalization, you have considered in a robust way a kind of exporting the brain, the European brain, because from Europe, the UK, Germany, sending in a good amount of people who can go in those countries and do a transfer of knowledge in a much substantive manner. In terms of 20, 30, 50 years to come, that might become a much bigger investment. But of course, I'm not talking about canceling what is happening now, having students coming here. Sorry for the time I have taken, but I wanted to share that. And especially that in perspective of African continent, though I saw it's 4%, but in terms of 20, 30, 40 years, we know in terms of demography, no other continent will count as Africa will count. And that is the most useful. So if you talk about the young people, in perspective, there is education and universities that are going to come along. So thank you so much.
So I don't know, Susanna and Kai, do you want to answer like with one sentence or not? You just, okay. Okay, now we have interesting question from the chat. Maybe they are more open. Speaking of mobility trends, we usually mention global citizens. Whether it is national students studying abroad or foreigners coming to the country, both of the groups can decide that they are not coming back to their country. Shouldn't we then stop aiming towards internationalization and start working on converting existing universities into global universities without borders and nationalities, making them truly international? I think it's the question for the whole conference, in fact. But maybe if all of you could answer with one sentence on this difficult question, and then we have to stop.
Yeah, I would just say that I would agree, because that is the origin of universities. Universities, both in the Islamic world and in the European world, their origin is being global by definition. That's why you still have to, the rector has to call the police to come on campus. This is the remains of this medieval notion. And I think that is what universities are about. We're there linking the region to the world. So I would deeply agree. And I would also add that this is what is happening. So you have some very interesting cases. To give you just one example, Yale University took out all mention of the US from their mission statement. New York University did the same, precisely because they decided that they no longer wanted to be thought of as an American university. There's a bit of marketing here, but there is a deep trend. And you find that in South America, you've got the University of Central Asia, for example, which is in different countries in Central Asia, and the Bolivian University in South America. You've got a few which are now emerging. And I think that is the future.
I mean, not contradicting, but just adding that the dream of your humanistic traditional university in the 15th century was also coming with a very elitist idea of a university that's more difficult to adapt to our times today. So it's not only, or it's not everything was good back at the times. Of course, this is an appealing idea, the one that was mentioned in the chat. But I think to be a bit more realistic, I think it's good when we start this in Europe. It's difficult enough to have a kind of this European alignment of regulations and alliances, and I think, and here we are on a quite a good way. I do personally appreciate the ideas of creating a European degree, of this joint legal status. I think these are all interesting new concepts introduced by the European Commission. And so I think we are on our way, and going global from here is definitely another challenge that we might tackle in, I don't know, 3 years from now, when we've solved all the European problems. No, but I think we've already started.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking how to answer this question, because I think it's a fantastic idea, and then there is a hard-hitting reality when we look at legislation, immigration, taxation, and life in general. So I love the idea, and when you look at the UK universities, most of them will have the word global in their mission and vision statements. I think we are stronger together and more efficient and effective when we work collectively together rather than if we work on our own. So in that sense, I do agree. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think it's a very appealing idea. We probably need to start with baby steps. So perhaps what Sebastian mentioned about networks, I think we have examples of good practice. We have a number of different networks, either European, well, national, international, European, regional, worldwide, and I think perhaps we need to focus on these in the first place, because these are existing links and relationships that we can grow and expand and see where that takes us. And I also think that ultimately the objective should be to help our students become global citizens, because the future is in their hands. Before we know it, governments will be led by our children and our grandchildren. So, the future is in their hands. And as I said before, I think it is really all about building the bridges.
Okay. I very much enjoyed the session, the presentation from the colleagues, also the questions from the audience. And I would like to link to the next session, which is about the Polish internationalization strategy. And I think what this session has shown is that countries need to get their strategic priorities right. It's important to consider what this is for. And we learned about different purposes. And I think in the case of UK, the strategic priorities are very clear. Yes. So I'm looking forward to the next session.
Thank you for ending the session. So thank you very much, and indeed, stay with us, because I think we had a bit of emotion still now, but the next session will be even more emotional, as the issue of visa is.
Dziękujemy serdecznie prezentującym i uczestnikom panelu.
We would like to thank the presenters and panel participants.
Teraz zapraszamy Państwa na krótką przerwę kawową. Kawa tym razem będzie podawana tylko na drugim piętrze.
Now we invite you to have a short coffee break. This time coffee will be served only on the second floor.
I zapraszamy o 16:30 na międzyresortowy panel zatytułowany Strategia państwa w pozyskiwaniu studentów zagranicznych z udziałem wiceministrów nauki i szkolnictwa wyższego, spraw zagranicznych, a także spraw wewnętrznych i administracji.
At 4:30 p.m. we will start an interministerial panel entitled State Strategy in Attracting International Students, with the participation of deputy ministers of science and higher education, foreign affairs, as well as internal affairs and administration.
Dziękujemy.
Thank you.
Tworzenie i wdrażanie krajowej strategii umiędzynarodowienia nauki i szkolnictwa wyższego w wielu obszarach zakłada współpracę międzyresortową.
The creation and implementation of a national strategy for the internationalization of science and higher education implies interdepartmental cooperation in many areas.
Pozyskiwanie studentów zagranicznych wymaga przemyślanych działań na poziomie państwa i powinno wiązać się z wzajemnym poznaniem i zrozumieniem ograniczeń i uwarunkowań determinujących stanowiska poszczególnych ministerstw.
Acquiring foreign students not only requires well-thought-out actions at the state level, but also should involve mutual knowledge and understanding of the limitations and conditions determining positions of individual ministries.
Mam ogromną przyjemność zaprosić na scenę
It is our great pleasure to invite on stage
doktora Pawła Dąbrowskiego, dyrektora Departamentu Spraw Międzynarodowych i Migracji w Ministerstwie Spraw Wewnętrznych i Administracji.
Dr Paweł Dąbrowski, Director of the Department for International Affairs and Migration, Ministry of the Interior and Administration.
Dr Henrykę Mościcką-Dendys, podsekretarz stanu w Ministerstwie Spraw Zagranicznych.
Dr Henryka Mościcka-Dendys, Deputy Minister of Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Profesora Andrzeja Szeptyckiego, podsekretarza stanu w Ministerstwie Nauki i Szkolnictwa Wyższego.
Professor Andrzej Szeptycki, Deputy Minister of Ministry of Science and Higher Education.
Dyskusję w języku polskim poprowadzi profesor Adam Gędźwił z Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego, wiceprzewodniczący Rady NAWA.
The discussion in Polish will be led by Professor Adam Gędźwił from the University of Warsaw, Deputy Chairman of the NAWA Council.
Zachęcamy Państwa do zadawania pytań naszym rozmówcom, zarówno tutaj na sali, jak i poprzez komentarze dodawane do transmisji kongresu na kanałach YouTube i Facebook NAWA.
You are encouraged to ask our interlocutors questions, both here in the room and through comments added to the Congress broadcast on NAWA's YouTube and Facebook channels.
Szanowni Państwo, dziękuję.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It is a huge honor for me to be able to moderate the last panel of today's Congress, a very important one focusing on the state strategy and the context of attracting foreign students. The state strategy in this realm is not just a strategy of a single ministry or of any representative, a single entity representing higher education or a particular department. It is the one that has to result from a dialogue across all these institutions. We are now at a point in time in which developing particular solutions comes across various tensions with the visa policy, for example, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is responsible for, and with a long-term migration policy that the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Administration is responsible for. Now there is a team working across ministries for migration policy headed by Deputy Minister Maciej Duszczyk, who apologizes for his absence. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us here today, even though he was on the list of guests originally. In this context, we can all see that various differences of values and interests surface that are related with deciding on the priorities. Therefore, we've invited honorable guests to participate in this panel that are experts in the realm. Before I give the floor to our panel speakers and ask them questions, let me tell you a few words on what you can read in the most recent report of an Institute of Information Processing on foreigners in Poland that shows us a few numbers depicting the situation in Poland and how it has changed. We are dealing with a success in terms of the success rate of the change from the low rate of foreign students studying in Poland in 2012 that amounted to 0.5%. We are now in 2022, 10 years later, reaching the level of 8.5%. In absolute numbers, it is 100,000 students. It is, of course, part of a very important business model. First of all, non-public universities, among them those with more than 50% of students being foreigners are represented, but there are also some public universities. The biggest public universities can also boast having a one or double-digit percentage of students from foreign countries. 70% of those study programs in Polish, mostly during our first grade programs. Almost 70% from foreign countries are Ukrainians and Belarusians among the countries with over 2% of the share in students studying in Poland. We have those from Turkey, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, recently also from Zimbabwe. What is popular is a 5-year program. Here, the geographical structure of those programs that students come from is somewhat different from what we have here. We have more OECD countries here with Norway and Germany on the lead. Somewhat different a situation is in doctoral schools, where there is a greater percentage of doctoral students from India. We can see that this situation is pretty dynamic. It is also contextualized in a dynamically changing geopolitical setting. This panel is going to be structured in the following way. We are going to have 2 rounds of questions. We do not envisage any presentations per se during this panel. And after those rounds, there will also be time for the questions from audience members and for the questions from the chat box. So all those who would like to participate in the discussion can jot down their questions, and then we will also ask them to our panelists. I'll start with a question to Minister Szeptycki, who represents the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. Certainly, you hear about the expectations and demands of the institutions representing the sector. Obviously, it is not possible to meet all the demands to the same degree. The question is, which of these needs in terms of attracting foreign students the ministry finds to be strategic? We are talking about a greater selectivity about the policy of destination approach, as some call it. What does that mean practically? What do we mean by selective geographical approach, and whether the selective approach also is reflected in the selective nature of programs or forms of teaching? Thank you very much, Professor. I believe that to begin with, I should share 2 words about you on the data. Not so much about the data, actually, but about the fact that we need to bear in mind that the data is what we owe to Polish universities in the first place. I represent the ministry, which has its pros and cons. For example, as opposed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it is difficult to actually attribute the results of the work to single entities. But here we have the universities that decide on the fee and so on, and we only manage it indirectly. It's important to mention that because this is something that conditions our activities, and that partly also answers your first question. We carry out our policy in response, at least partly in response to those demands that we get from the sector. Of course, we have our own ideas and priorities as well, but this Congress is part of the dialogue that we've been involved in. So what our academic partners mostly ask for? Of course, we are talking about the international context first and foremost. Most of the questions concern 3 crucial areas. First of all, it's the visas and making the foreign students stay legal. Then it's about the funds for research. And thirdly, these questions concern the broadly understood security of science. And it is these 3 issues around which our activity revolves in the international realm. As for the visas, our academic partners mostly report that the students and academic staff members wait too long for the visa or residence permit to be issued, which leads some of them to resign from their endeavor. So somebody got a grant, they wanted to employ somebody from India, but then it was too late. The person had to refrain from coming. So we cooperate here closely, also with Minister Mościcka-Dendis and her ministry, and also with Minister Duszczyk. We've been cooperating within a working group for visas. It's a migration team, a governmental migration team that we are part of. We agree as to for the diagnosis of the common issues, but we put stress elsewhere. Madam Minister talks about making the system more leak-proof. I'm talking about making it more resilient. But once we fill the gap, what we will be able to guarantee is the access to Polish education for top students or scholars. And we would like to reduce the time of waiting for the visas or residence permits. As for the funds, so issue number 2, we've increased the total budget by 7 billion zlotys this year, and the state budget altogether allocates as much as about 1 billion zlotys. I'm talking about 2023. 1 billion, so 250 within NAVA and 750 in subsidies. We've also increased financing for particular programs of exchange. I'm talking about Fulbright, among other programs. Its budget increased from 5 to 6 million zloty. I'm talking about the Polish side. The Americans contribute the same amount. They are important partners. And then the third issue is science security. Here, often the questions are posed about cooperation with China, about whether we should cooperate with scholars and staff members affiliated at Belarusian universities. Some basic standards have been set. In 2022, we entirely broke cooperation with the Russian Federation. To this, we added a decision recently on not paying grants to grantees from Russia. Of course, if somebody has a formal status of a refugee, then it is a different case. But as for Belarusians, there are no particular guidelines, but then we will add, we would have to add Tajikistan and other countries, so we are not going to adopt such single solutions concerning such rogue states. But as for China, the reply is always as follows: work because it's necessary and favorable, but make sure it's safe so that we have a bi-directional exchange of ideas, not just a brain drain. In terms of geographical directions, it's important, and this is something that also is reflected in the data that Professor quoted. We mostly admit the students from, let me use the term, the countries of the global south. Of course, many of them are our direct neighbors. You've got the political issue here as well, the war in Ukraine, or the political situation and repressions in Belarus. But there are also universities that make their living on admitting students from the global south, also the more distant countries of the global south. So responding to your question is not that straightforward. On the one hand, I would like to have different geographical priorities, which I'll mention in a moment. On the other hand, as long as this procedure is legal, probably you'll hear more from Madam Minister about that. So as long as the students really have the right to study here because they graduated, they had their A-levels, they really speak English, they really come here to study, then within the existing legal regulations, I do not have the right to ban it or to discourage the universities from doing that, as long as they act in compliance with the Polish legal provisions. But we wouldn't like more students to come to Poland from developed countries. We would like to see more of them. But when we look at the first 20, Ukraine, Belarus, Zimbabwe, we only have 4 countries in the second 10 of this top 20 in terms of numbers of students representing higher developed countries. Norway, Germany, Ireland, and Czechia. The other ones are not that well-developed countries. So we take steps in order to counteract this situation I've talked about. The Fulbright program, NAVA, has an entire set of instruments addressed to these countries This is a campaign called Ready, Steady, Go Poland. It is also a program dedicated to representatives of highly developed countries. Poland, my first choice. We also have a program for the Polish diaspora and the SNAWA. So we did try to attract more students and researchers from well-developed countries. Apart from that, and that's the last thing I'm going to say now, what appears to be quite important is attracting and increasing the attracting of semi-students, semi-scholars, that is doctoral students. And this is because I would like to, sound too economic-like, but it's a good investment. And again, the data from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, show that doctoral students are more stable in sticking to their plans rather than abandoning the country halfway through or afterwards. And here we have actually the highest level of internationalization. Around 13% of doctoral students are those foreign students in doctoral schools. And here again, we have a domination of nationals from India or Ukraine, but they are those certain ones, stable ones. So the visas, funds, and security would be the three major issues. Developing countries, because that's what we have. Developing countries, yes, please, we would like to have more. And then doctoral students, because they are certain and we can be sure that they will really do what they came to do and what they were granted visa to do. We will return to the question of how to attain all these goals. But before that, I would like to address a question to Madam Minister.
Internationalization strategies that we are discussing here and that it's working going on, which isn't going to be coordinated with visa policy, it's going to be very problematic. And here we have got the geopolitical situation, deteriorating situation, visa scandal from 2023, which was very discussed in the media. So it looked like the direction of changes in visa policy in Poland is very predictable. It's going to be more restrictive. But how to ensure that the restrictive visa policy does not harm the ongoing process of transformation of the science and higher education? Whether the Ministry of Foreign Affairs responsible for visa policy has got power on that? Thank you very much for this question, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's really an honor to represent the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and thank you that you're interested in what we think in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the policy of internationalization of Polish universities. Maybe I'm going to reverse the speech of Mr. Professor, and I'm going to say that I'm here because we, as Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like to respond positively on your needs, but we need to decide on certain regulations that we're going to follow. The process of internationalization is very true. This is the way that Polish education is going to follow in the future, higher education, because we are observing certain demographic trends that take place in this country. We're observing the needs of different sectors. But first of all, I think this is the first sentence I would like to highlight. In Poland, we have had the meaningful change of paradigm that not everyone realized. Poland became an attractive country for immigrants. For hundreds of years, we thought of ourselves as a country that we leave. Poland is well known, that has got international diaspora, but nevertheless, we found ourselves in the situation that Poland is becoming interesting place for immigrants. We are here at the Munich Medical University, and I think that students of medical studies realized how attractive destination is Poland. A decade ago, some students started coming to Poland to study medicine because we offer high quality of studies for and affordable studies. And this is a second constatation. Ladies and gentlemen, Polish visa and Polish studies are goods very too available. I'm going to tell you very openly to raise costs. Studying in Poland, when it comes to quality, to the price is too cheap, definitely, and also the field to abuse. So I would like us to start Polish university internationalization, not in amounts of students applied and enrolled to Polish studies, but to count it in students who graduate. The source of visa scandal and other plots connected to job permit, it relates to the situation when a student comes to Poland to study, is unable to start work. As a result, we had a large group of people who didn't plan to study in Poland. They enrolled to studies with the idea that they come here to work. Councils visited a lot of countries in global south, confronted with the situation that the person whose visa to work was rejected came a few days ago pretending to be a student. And this is one of the problems that we need to solve commonly. And here we have got other plots that I would like to discuss later on. I would like to encourage you, and this is going to be element that we would want to introduce on the level of regulations. We have got a dialogue with our colleagues through Ministry of Education, and I would like to thank Minister Szeptycki. Sometimes, very often, we also have arguments on different topics, but ladies and gentlemen, we need to introduce like minimal standards of recruitation in Poland. Please believe me that things that our councils pay attention to is fictional enrollment of people who shouldn't have ever start studies because they don't have right to that. Each person who wants to start studies needs to have Matura exam. Why you don't demand it from foreign students? This is very important. We need to respect minimal regulations. First of all, it's Matura exam, then language, and then we would have less visa pressure on Polish consulates. And this is, from our point of view, really key thing, because then we would be able to help you to provide visas faster if the criteria is clear from the beginning. We would like to, of course, and of course we're going to discuss this issue later on, we would like to create easier access path. And it demands legal changes that we are working on currently for scholars, for people participating in the research programs, also for doctoral students, in order to make the transfer of really valuable talents faster. As Minister have said, the foreigner is waiting for such a long time, he finally decides to go to other country. The system that we observe from our point of view today, the system where people coming to Polish consular office want to get visa, not to study here actually, but only to come to Schengen zone, cannot function for in longer term this way, because it is a threat for Schengen zone, and in longer term it leads to depreciation of our system. In the perspective or the next decade, if we keep this way, it's going to influence negatively Polish education. And my the last part of my speech that I would like to highlight here, somehow correlation of internationalization of higher education with aim of Poland and Polish foreign politics. We would like to encourage you to start recruiting in the areas that might be more difficult for us. So widely perceived West, to scrutinize Polish diaspora abroad, which appeared in one of the previous discussion that diaspora is interesting target group, if we can say so. We're going to start soon in Ministry of Foreign Polonian strategy in the context of people who left Poland in the last 20 years, going to be one of crucial elements. So I encourage you to work on this element, but also to scrutinize countries, our neighboring countries. I know that the recruitment is more difficult and we are in they are our competition, but I think it's worth it. And we'd like to encourage you to work not only with our neighbors, but also with countries which are in the agenda of European Union, from Western Balkans to Georgia. And these are countries where our investment will bring really effects when it comes to building good practices. And I think building Polish ambassadors of Polishness, which we care the most. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister. For those, I would like to ask about those quick paths in the second round, but I would like to also ask some opening presentation. So Director Dąbrowski, Minister said very important thing, that the character of migration of Poland has changed. And as a result, we have this change without any current migration strategy. The works on the strategy are ongoing in to 2030 in the Ministry of Interior and Administration. I'd like to ask you, where the higher education is going to be in this strategy? And in higher education, in the context of internationalization strategy, we thought this is a kind of medicine reaction to not the best geopolitical situation, and the reality has changed the priorities. Is it going to be taken into consideration in this new migration strategy that works are ongoing? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to refer to this personal change. Minister Duszczyk asked me to say sorry for his absence. It's connected with personal changes on the highest level of Ministry of Interior and Administration, and all ministers needs to be in Warsaw today. But because of this coincidence and this personal change, I'm really satisfied that I can participate in such an interesting Congress. The topic of migration strategy is one of the basic critical points of political agenda of Ministry of Interior and Administration. And the Minister of Interior and Administration holds the task of coordination of migration politics. And the present team, when they gain the power, they decided, they claimed the strong need of changes in this field. The announcement of taking the document like a migration strategy maybe isn't very interesting, but we see how important is it when we take into the consideration the fact that this is the element of certain process designed as a very deep change. How does it look right now? Where are we now? First of all, we are connecting service because they were sent to very different subjects, organization, with the goal to refer to different issues of migration policy of our country. So we suggest a role to a non-governmental organization, the role not of a critic, but also somehow a promoter of those changes. And we treated very seriously the voices, the opinions that we get. We also have the agreement with Polish Academy of Science, which is going to be responsible for the meritocratic aspect when it comes to data necessary to work on the document, and also methodology. So other kind that are going to appear in this document. So what's going to be the final effect doesn't have the features of well-known process like OSR, assessment of the results of regulations when we have got the thesis of the changes. So the data is very credible. The strategy is going to be accepted by mentioned more the team of migration, and we hope that's going to happen in autumn this year. The waves, the meaning of this document is that this migration strategy is introductory point to the further point of changes, rebuilding, especially the legal surrounding of migration to Poland and in-depth reform about foreigners, which is planned for 2025. Those new legal regulations for the next year, they're not going to be accidental. They're not the result of necessity of any quick implementation of directive or implementing new document of European Union. They are not got the features of technical discussion between different ministries. They're going to be the result of what's going to be the result of our strategy discussion. The obvious thing is that a very important issue of this document is going to be the issue of legal migration in the sector of higher education, so student migration. I don't know whether this kind of migration, student migration, are going to be separated for the separate chapter, but I can say without any doubts that they're going to be highlighted in this document and their meaning is going to be emphasized. And also, this document must be logically related with a preview document about internationalization. What's our plan? Of course, this is just the announcement because decisions are the team, but our general direction for the discussion that it's ongoing. First of all, as Ministry of the Interior and Administration, very thin red line goes across keeping the control over the migration processes. Not necessarily the restrictions, and definitely not the Ministry of the Interior and Administration doesn't want to have the situation when it's going to be the contrary of the processes of internationalization of universities. We support internationalization if is intelligent internationalization. In my opinion, the idea of internationalization is, I cannot understand the situation of issues that are discussed in one of the magazines, abuse, but also the abuses that were during the commission set by the council, those signals we hear, and we need to react as the Ministry of the Interior. So we need to have the situation when the country has the power to control really in bigger extent the migration, especially the university migration. and to react on any incorrectness. And this implies particular actions. We want to start from our own ground. I totally agree with the opinions that have been stated today. It's not acceptable that legalization takes so much time as it is today. We have no time to discuss the origins of this problem. This is something that we definitely needs to change, and we are going to change. The minister of the Internal Administration have sanctions instruments. I mean, the withdrawing accreditation from universities to accept foreign students, and also the processing connected with banning accepting foreign students. Maybe they're going to be applied more widely, but we want this
Effective
instrument to be very effective. I'm not going to promise you very fast paths, because in this system we haven't got any human resources that can be moved. But I'm going to promise, and I hope that I'm going to keep the promise, to rationalize this system with the reference to students. But we are talking about general rationalization of this system, which is nowadays very overloaded. So I'd like you to remember from my speech is the emphasis that the ministry supports internationalization, but is going to make its actions, which means we're going to fight all the pathologies and all the situations that can be described as abuse of responsibilities, which are referred to foreigners, immigrants, students, and the university. Thank you very much.
No.
The time has come for yet another round of questions, a bit more specific this time, related to what we've heard from you. The first question goes to Minister Szeptycki. We've heard that internationalization is about exchanging of ideas and persons with the most important centers that can boast a high level of research and development, but also that are strategically important to Poland. So far, we managed to do that in only limited scope, which you admitted in your previous contribution yourself. How can we affect the change here? And is the ministry going to use any such instruments in the nearest time, so that we can tell something more over the example of marimba that you mentioned? How to change this vector towards the quality exchanges? Let me share some other anecdotes as well, so as not to be associated with marimba only. We are only building our international position amidst this very competitive market of academic exchange. And we are struggling here among the highly developed countries with a number of issues. Financial issues are only some of those. In 2024, in absolute numbers, we've increased the expenditure on science. But when you look at the leaders, not even mentioning the US, but South Korea or Israel, when we compare their investments into science, it's a few percent of GDP, 3 or 4%. We are still much lower than that, and we are planning a gradual increase of expenditure in this realm, but this is not something that you can attain in the time span of a year or two. So that's the basic obstacle. In Poland, we also have quite limited in access or presence. Maybe that would be a better way to put it. Access to the most advanced scientific infrastructure. I'm talking here about life sciences first and foremost. This costly infrastructure for many years has been developed gradually whenever and wherever resources were available for that under the Cold War. So it was mostly in Western Europe where you'll find CERN, among other institutions. In Western Europe, we have EMBR, so the European Laboratory for Molecular Biology. We do send our researchers there. There are ideas in the scientific milieu for those molecular studies in the laboratory to be brought to Poland. But still, if our scientists want to carry out research projects within this realm, they need to go west. Another issue is a relatively small participation of business in supporting scientific research in Poland. As a result, a scientist stands a lower chance of financial planning of their professional career so as to combine their scientific and business activities. If these two dimensions do not intersect, well, the situation is often dire. What can be done? Well, starting at the very grassroots level, you need to create more attractive curricula that will attract students from developed countries, highly developed countries. We've heard that already. So all sorts of joint or double degrees that will make it possible for a student who graduates a university here in Poland to be granted a diploma of a Western university as well. Another thing is the accreditations, again, for a student with a Polish degree to be able to take up employment in the regulated professions outside the country. Some other attractive forms of teaching deploying cutting-edge technologies. In the TikTok era, traditional lectures read out from a piece of paper for 90 minutes, this is something that has become exotic. Worse than that, this is something that young people do not find appealing at all, to say the least. Now, maybe just a side remark, but also responding to your questions, also about our direct presence and social media, also those like TikTok that are frowned upon by some. And it is about us becoming part of the Western world, but also of us gaining some recognition and visibility among young people. There are also some solutions verging on online presence, like introducing gamification of the programs so that they are more in line with what young people know and find attractive. Innovativeness of the programs themselves and the curricula themselves is also something we should focus on. They should be attractive not only to the students from global south of Poland, but also from those better developed countries. We need to build and equip quality R&D centers and also of the cutting-edge, top-notch research infrastructure. I hope nobody minds when I give an example of a MIDMIC from Warsaw, so an institutional institute of molecular biology. Another anecdote following the one with Marimba. That's an institution where 80-90% of people are those who have had experience of scientific research abroad, where nobody is permanently employed, where there's a national council of the institute, and it has to sign under every 2-year contract. And in this context, you can really make science. They complain. I ask them, what do you complain about? You are good, so you will not get complaints about something not working for you, even though the conditions are favorable. They say no financing, parameterization, no resources for a new building. But we have centers that actually represent a world-class level. They know how to do that. A few examples of regulations on the basis of which the MITMIC is operating. These are the issues we can refer to. Of course, a systematic, everyday cooperation with our partners from the US. I mentioned Fulbright is necessary, but also cooperation with countries such as France and Germany, them also being better developed in certain respects. We have had within the current government at least 5 meetings with the heads of the German ministry, so with our counterparts in Germany, not to mention some more local meetings with the representatives of particular federal states of Germany. That shows our contacts that we have every day. When I got a memo on cooperation, usually I get a note of 2 or 3 pages, for example, from an ambassador, but I got a booklet of several pages, and I said, okay, we have a half an hour meeting. We will spend half a day going through this little report. But anyhow, that shows you how much is being done, and we take up all sorts of efforts. There are also more institutionalized forms of bilateral contacts. There are scientific forums. Last year we had the 7th Polish and French Forum of Science and Innovation. This year, probably around September, the Polish-British Scientific Forum is going to be held, both of them devoted to, and that shows priority areas, both of them focusing on space related research, a prospective direction. And also we provide financial incentives to our researchers to get involved in the operations of those key centers, even if these are located in Western Europe. The European Molecular Biology Laboratory, or the Organization of Molecular Biology, or the European Program for Cooperation on Scientific and Technical Research, of course. So wrapping up. The financing, the infrastructure, interesting curricula, and everyday cooperation with the best ones. I guess that these are the most important instruments that are likely to make us get closer to the center of global science. Thank you very much. These are also instruments showing the integration of science and higher education, the instruments that are to impact higher education, and they should be perceived as linked to the quality of scientific research.
The question about fast tracks. Could you tell us a little bit more about how they could look like? How does the roadmap looks like to achieve the system where fast tracks are going to be applicable? And I'm going to narrow this question because it seems to me that the most crucial for our audience today are the tracks, perhaps referring to students and doctoral students, because this is obvious in recruiting academic staff. There is a need of income, and the stream is much smaller. But when it comes to students and doctoral students, how it could look in practice? Thank you for this question, and I would like to answer very honestly. In scientific and developmental programs of academic centers giving research programs, and we are considering actually what kind of legal changes we can introduce which could help to achieve those fast track and make them available. We would like to go to the level of doctoral studies and participants of scientific conferences. As I said before, this is the work that demands legal changes, and I would like to introduce those legal changes that are going to come into life even this year. But we do not predict it for students coming to Poland. And here, 2 sentences to complement and to add what I've said before. So I think that we all agree in this room that internationalization of Polish universities is to help the quality and the prestige of Polish higher education institutions. But also we need to remember that it doesn't go in the vacuum. And we can refer it to Director Dąbrowski has said, from the perspective of Polish policy, we need to know who comes here and what for. And this is also the question to you, because higher education is directed to some needs. Previously, I've said that Poland became attractive for immigrants. Large group of students who come to studies are going to stay here. And obviously, we are interested in that they graduate and stay here, but it also means that in the curriculum, we need to have some integrative instruments provided. So teaching of Polish language needs to be more present in curriculum, especially where we assume that the student is going to stay in Poland, not leave the country. The second element that is crucial in this context is a business model. Minister said already, giving American example, that we have nothing against to earn money on students and higher education, obviously. But we need to be aware that this model can be realized as long as we have got the social acceptance. The problem that we note nowadays is the problem of privatization of the income from students and making the cost public. And this is the issue that we need to work on within the framework of migration policy. So wrapping up, fast tracks, yes, but within the framework of the most crucial instruments, which are the most important for our high education, so scholars and doctoral students. When it comes to students, rather organizing system than extending the access. I would rather say that now we are focusing to narrow the field to real actual students who want to come to Poland to study and they want to abuse the system. I'm going to use just one data that I want you to note. The comparison of global comparison, how foreigners study in Poland is really dramatic. It's very poor. The average, statistical average for students who continue after the studies after the first semester is below 50%. In some universities, only a few percent. So we need to help each other to eliminate dishonest players from the market before we could start discussing the following steps. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Minister. The last question to Director, and it refers a little bit to model examples that we've discussed during earlier previous panels. We were wondering whether we have got cases of people who have a very sustainable, balanced migration policy, also in the area of higher education. But in our previous conversation, you said that Polish is in a very specific situation, and it's really hard to copy German, British, Dutch pattern. Why is it like that? And whether our migration policy is going to be a clash of different systems, different solutions? Yes, I confirm that Poland today is in a very special situation. It's hard to compare with the country which solution can be perceived as model solutions in the context of countries' control, regulation of migration, education migration. So let me explain what is this specific situation. We are the country of European Union, and this kind of migration is regulated by the European law. So the legal frameworks and the regulations of European Union set our works and actions. So solutions from other continents, from the US, from Canada, cannot be applicable one-to-one in Poland because we just don't fit here. But let's consider further parameters of our situation. First of all, Poland is in the moment of history that's really huge increase of my immigration in our whole social and economical situation. Those immigration rates are really the biggest. And our current, for example, Act of Foreigners was written and came into life at the moment when we have got kind of transition from in 2013 and in 2014, and the further years are the years of huge percent jump of all the migration rates, or almost all. So this is the legislation which was created in the previous migration era, and it implies that now we have got overloaded system to this extent that we cannot compare with other European countries in this field. And the next parameter is that the process of internationalization of higher education in Polish situation means that universities reach the global south. And it has got huge meaning from the perspective of migration policy, because these are the countries which are classified are countries of migration risk, and we are required to have visa or very high risk, relatively low participation of union migration, and those from high developed countries, which results in difficulties of legalization and the need of verification of different factors, but also when we look at the legal situation of such a migrant, we can give the example of a migrant from the country of OECD. So here the procedures are much easier. But when such a person is outside of OECD, we need the further processing, and it also depends of particular conditions. So it's quite difficult and complex situation, which results with the fact that it's hard to compare the situation of some country as a model. But it doesn't mean that we are alienated. We observe our partners' actions. First of all, I'd like to say that we have signals from your community. One of the signals tells that mobility procedures aren't respected the best. In short, in real, a foreigner who would like to omit the visa procedures and get some double degree to Poland within the framework of mobility in the Foreigners Act, before he, with his papers, visa or residence permit, got in other country, before he finally gets this mobility right, actually he's going to be a graduate. So we are observing, we are looking at the other European countries' solutions, and we have got our conclusions. Here I would like to stop, but I would answer in this way. In fact, it's not the problem that can be closed in the discussion about students' migration or wider migration in the sector of higher education. This is the structural problem of the whole system. It's vast overloading. And where the problem has got structural character, we need to look for structural total solutions addressed not to students, in fact, but to all immigrants who enter the system. Such a system which, because of its effectiveness, prizes respect and our interest. And this is the system of Denmark, which is one of the most effective immigration systems. And we are scrutinizing and watching it carefully. But also, I'm going to hide that comparison in preparing this reform is very important element. But the analysis, how the regulations, national regulations work, dominates where we have got some gaps and why it works in unsatisfying way. We are aiming to the situation where the quality is raised. It seems to me that we know quite a lot about the problems of higher education, at least in the field of the problems with legislations. Thank you. Let's move to questions that we've promised. It's very important, very hot topic, so I'm sure that we have questions. Please ask questions to one of our panelists. Here I see the first question, please. Good morning, Michał Sowiński, Academy of Justice. I have a question to Minister Szeptycki. Namely, we are talking about internationalization of higher education, but also from our discussion, we have got two categories. We were talking about positive sides of internationalization of science, while Minister Mościcka-Dendys talked about threats of internationalization of education. So I have questions whether we monitor somewhere in the Ministry of Education, Science and Higher Education, the suggestion that is being discussed in the Netherlands when it comes to setting particular borders in internationalization of education. So the question whether the internationalization of science and education have any borders, whether do we have any borders for internationalization of education. So from also economic perspective is being widely discussed in Netherlands, and Dutch minister supports setting boundaries in internationalization of education. Minister, please, very short answer. First, differentiation. I think the issue is that we have got less scholars than students. So if they come, they usually work. So I was discussing the benefits from the education. But going back to your questions, I don't know what is the suggestion in details, but in my opinion, now in our legislation situation, it's impossible because universities, they have got their own autonomy, which I've discussed at the beginning, also informing the recruitation. So it would demand really deep legal changes that we were able as a ministry or maybe as a legislator set limits in particular universities, also geographical directions. And I think I have got a very bad association. We have got such a plate in our university, but no, this is my private thoughts. And here we have got also another question. Good morning, Alexandra. I have got question to Minister Mościcka and Minister Duszczyk. First question is about minimal standards of recruitation, which Mrs. Minister mentioned. I remember from history our previous act, the law of higher education from 2005, had some minimal standards of recruitation, also with the executive legislation about foreign students. So my question is whether the Ministry of Higher Education and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in closer on further perspective, do they have plans to introduce enrollment standards? And the second question to the Minister of Interior and Administration, when it comes to tools of tools connected with rationalization of residence. I've checked on the website of Ministry of Interior and Administration. We have got the list of 165 universities for 10th of April situation, which in 2019 have the permit to recruit foreigners, and the permit is for 5 years, which means this year the permit ends and validity when it comes to the enrollment of foreign students. So my question is, what is the perspective? Do you have any plans in the context of prolonging decisions and validity for the recruitation of foreign students?
So in the same order, just for the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Administration, as to the standards about verifying the knowledge command, the language command. This is what we base on the experience of the offices of consul, where potential students appear not being able to communicate in the language that they would have to study in. So that's our ideas are just a logical consequence of one of the pathologies that have been identified, also in relation to what we call the visa gate here in Poland. As for the numbers, the Minister of Internal Affairs and Administration has issued 170 positive decisions so far concerning the certification of universities, allowing them to enroll foreign students, and 18 negative decisions. This period is not fixed. Not all the accreditations expire this year. It depends on when the application was filed and when the decision was issued. However, there are also decisions with a shortened period of their validity, I call it certification. So again, the more so is the period variable. The decisions are binding, so we are going to respect the law, and there are not going to be any general turn towards negative decisions or a general trend to issue bans. But we would like to work effectively and to react with resilience and agility to the issues that we specified and I talked about in the previous contribution. We can see a person wishing to ask a question here in the first row, Professor. Thank you very much, Staszek Kistryn, Jagiellonian University, Krakow, and the main council for higher education. I'm not sure whether it is a question, but I would direct this comment to the representatives of the ministries. Now, we have not mentioned European universities in this particular debate, and this is something that is gaining ground. There are 24 universities now in alliances. Maybe it is not too big a number, but in terms of number, it is actually a big one because these are the biggest Polish universities. All the regulations that would eventually be adopted need to take it into account that we do have joint programs of studies where the enrollment takes place in a single university, but it makes the students of a few universities in Europe, and that concerns also students from non-European countries. The system cannot be clogged up, and I would really ask you to remember that we are also entering the new paths that require a different approach. Namely, we need to be able to apply some special rules, if I may call them so, that would simply not hinder progress and would not disable the new opportunities. Okay, I understand it was more of a comment contributing to the discussion rather than a question. I can see another question right there. Go ahead, please. Okay, in a moment. Bartłomiej Nowak, just a short comment. First of all, Oxford. Until recently, the European Union, 67% of students from beyond the European Union are the graduates of this university. That's just a brief comment on what we've heard. What I missed in this discussion was the economic perspective. I'm speaking now as in my capacity of an economist. First of all, there's a discussion about salaries for staff members, and also the mechanism of pricing that Madam Minister pointed at. And you did see that in Poland we have a very favorable quality to price ratio, but increasing prices is something that in international competition will make some of the students choose not us, but say Lithuania or some other countries, right? So the schools are part of an international competition, and this is the way to look at it. And so the price is actually our competitive advantage here in Poland. So we shouldn't really overdo the changes and actually deprive us of this competitive advantage. Now let's look at the demography of the students, what kind of students we have. These are not those that simply are trying to get to the European Union. Most of the students coming to Poland are those that can afford to go to another country to come to Poland, or a group that can partly afford it and partly need to work here in Poland to make ends meet. And they work in different areas, not just as Uber drivers, but that later on, many of the students work in multinational companies. So this issue here appears to be slightly more complex. We've also mentioned continuing studies. Where is the greatest challenge? It's not the students dropping out after the first year of studying, but it's them not staying here after completing their BA studies. In their own countries, what matters is having a degree from the Polish university. If Poland is just a transit state for them, you can approach it from two different angles as well. So it seems to me that this issue is more complex, and it calls for a broader discussion taking various aspects into account. Okay, again, we will treat it as a response at bottom to what we've heard from Madam Minister. Would you like to respond? Yes, actually, I feel like being called out here, and I'm going to, if I hope Bartek forgives it to me. And well, it is quite an important context within the realm of a migration-oriented discussion. I will refer to the first sentence that Mr. Bartłomiej Nowak uttered: Oxford, until recently part of the European Union. Let me remind you that one of the basic factors in the Brexit debate was migration. We cannot refrain from taking this topic into account. I'm going now to talk about the Dutch factor and thread, the Netherlands withdrawing from a very expensive internalization strategy concerning education. These are the lessons that we should learn, and we should take the social context into account too. To be fair, we should be able to admit the fact that the Poles are skeptical when it comes to massive migration. So regaining control over migration is one of the priorities of the current government, which means that when we internationalize higher education, we cannot neglect this context. And I do not believe that when the studies are cheaper in Poland, we will attract more students, because otherwise they will go to Lithuania, the Baltic states, or elsewhere. No, you need to compete with quality and not with the cost of educating. And again, I'm going to defend the view that the education in Poland is too cheap. Consuls prepare statistical juxtapositions showing how we fit into the international context, and also often it is cheaper to study in Poland than, for example, in Bangladesh. That, well, let's admit it is one of the least affluent countries in the world. Another problem, and here comes the story of a consul from Morocco. Gaining a Polish student visa and a fee for the first year of studies, not medical studies, probably different studies, is cheaper than an attempt of illegal crossing of the Mediterranean Sea. So these are the issues that we need to take into account. I know that you don't need to necessarily consider it in your work, but in recent months, we've been talking amidst the works of the migration team. We have analyzed several factors. We need to treat Poland as a developed and attractive country, and migration has its social context that we cannot afford to neglect. Thank you very much for this opinion. I know that there are some other contributions at the back of the room there. It is hard for me to see that as the spotlight is directed right into my eyes. Nuclear Physics Institute. I'm the head also of a big doctoral school. Until recently, I'm a former director. Recently, I was the director, and replying to what we've heard from Madam Minister, I agree that when we talk about student, there has to be some admission exam limit that goes without saying. But people that we admit to doctoral studies do pass exams, and they get qualified. And the employees that are supposed to come to us again need to go through a verification process. And someone who is a national of India or Iran or Pakistan, and they're awaiting a visa for 3 months or 6 months, and Poland is not their first choice, as Mr. Minister put it, then very often we are the third or second choice. And when such a person doesn't get a visa, then strangely, they do get a visa issued by a German consulate rather than the Polish one. What issues does it raise? A doctoral school faces huge challenges because it has to admit a doctoral student only when there is this recruitment window. When it's closed, we need to open another call to recruit new people, those who are supposed to be enrolled to study in our place. We need people also to work. Before this discussion, we had another one, a panel discussion on the internationalization of doctoral schools, and we devoted at least half an hour of our talks to that problem. And that's very important because the group of doctoral students that what we actually admit does not really reflect the demand among foreign students. We are in mid-May and the academic year is close to be over. So when we wait for too long a time, the issue will stretch over another period.
I want to come back to what I have said earlier. We are working on legislation directed to those two groups. So academic staff and participants of research projects and doctoral students are going to enable the realization of applications on fast tracks. And I hope that we are going to be ready in autumn with our solutions. Thank you very much. Lady, please. Good morning, Dr. Monika Wysocka, Naval Academy, the proxy to academic exchange, and also the initiative of our military students in Europe. I would like to ask Minister Szeptycki, also thank you for wonderful and very interesting speeches, whether during creation of new internationalization strategy, you're going to take into consideration the specifics of our university, because it's very often in this way that you look at the specifics of medical universities, fine arts academies, but we are unwanted children. And here we have got the representative of Ministry of Justice, also is the representative of other military universities, because we joined the different programs very late, and in order to enter military universities or represented by the Ministry of Justice, we are very limited. So I'd like to pay your attention and also ask to take into consideration the specifics of our universities, because I really care that we have also the internationalization, especially that this is written in the strategies of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of the Interiors, also when it comes to internationalization of already mentioned universities. Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. And I think that it reflects the aim of our meeting the best, because we've started working on the internationalization strategy, but we want also to discuss those specific questions, not minor. We want to discuss them, and I think it's a good moment that now, verbally, or maybe later in a written form, direct, I think, Mr. Director, to Nava in a written form, those notices that you formulated in short, and they are going to reach the right team, which works on the strategies, and I assume they're going to be taken into consideration. Thank you very much. We have got time for one more questions, please. Liliana Lato, Łódź University. I've got a large number of questions, but we have got little time. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for your presence and that we have got discussion on this topic, because it isn't like Polish universities. We do not realize the threats and what's going on. But we have got this kind of acts. And the minister talked about low costs of enrollment. This is the act we cannot differentiate. We used to have the act that gave us space to charge more, and in fact, we didn't have a large flow of people that we weren't able to verify. You mentioned the access to work market. There are countries in euros which narrowed the market or limited the possibilities at the beginning. When we have discussion at our university with the students, first thing that we tell them that do not start work because they are not going to be able to complete their studies. You said that we have got a large number of people who resign or just disappear. This is large problems. They go through the first interview, they study very well, but after 2-3 weeks, they want to make a transfer, which is impossible, or they write a document and they resign. So we need to give their fees back and they disappear. So my questions, or maybe not questions, invitation and appeal that we can start multi-resort and multi-university discussions at some bigger table, because today's short meeting is just a drop. We have got very vast knowledge. Me as or our university as a member of IROS Forum have a group of more than 3 experts of enrollment. We have got 30 public universities. You discussed few issues that cannot be referred to public universities. I'm really sorry that we have got such a visas problems, but it's really hard what you have mentioned, Professor, that it's impossible for some people to get to consulate. They pay for the access to the slot more than for their studies. We realize that some of them come here to work and we do not want it. I want to make it clear, we care that a person who starts studies graduates. But let's make things clear. Polish students also have quite big dropout, about 30-40%. So it isn't a very separate situation. The problem is that they do not stay in Poland or in Schengen zone. So we as academic centers, I hope I'm not going to be criticized, but I see the problem of bigger verification, whether they really attend classes. This is like in British system. There are systems which verify. When during 1 or 2 months, we know that the person does not attend classes, there are mechanisms that make it difficult for him to reside in a particular country. We have got really huge problems here. I think you are aware of that. For us, enrolling hundreds of applicants, it's a huge work. which very often doesn't go in the right direction. And it's really hard work for us. We are open for discussion. We are eager to share our experience. We can prepare our own statistics because we care. And also we care that we see which countries are priorities for us. Third countries from the south, as you've said, they pay fees for us. Students from European Union, this is a very difficult topic in my career. I've worked for 14 years. I haven't got much students like that. They choose other directions. It isn't even about money. We have got really a lot of subjects to discuss. I know I need to finish, but first of all, I would like to cordially thank you that you talk with us, and any decisions in any ministry. We also lack here the Ministry of Education, a discussion about validating certification in the context of Belarus, which is second biggest group of very good students with the card of Pole, which in a moment won't be able to study in Poland because they are going to bring the documents that are required. They're going to have those documents stamped, but they are not able to bring what they have. And I hope you are discussing this problem as well. Thank you very much. I raise a hand to support this, what we have got in the program, and also we have time later. We need to complete and to wrap up this panel. So Belarus. This is the problem that we have got really high in our list, in our agenda. There is no easy solution of the situation because this is our decision of state of Belarus to prevent brain draining. The regime limits the mobility of students. There is no easy solution of the situation, but I would like to assure you that we are working on this, and it's going to be the problem in the perspective of the next recruitation. You mentioned the disappearing of students and the dropout. This is also the problem which is discussed very intensively, also with Ministry of the Interior. The problem of the dropout of Polish students doesn't raise any emotions, but when we have got a dropout of students from unstable and with the potential risk of safety, who we cannot deport because the countries of origin aren't stable. Now you have to understand how difficult discussion is it from our perspective. So that's why we're going to encourage you, and this is how the migration politics is going to look like. So the geographical destination needs to be correlated. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, physicians may correct me here, but usually time does not shrink. But here we have got just one sentence of conclusions from each panelist. So please just condense your conclusions from this panel. Thank you.
Minister Andrzejewski wrote a long sentence that constituted a book. That's a risky proposal. Anyhow, what I think is to be vital is that the situation we've been discussing is not just binary. In many examples, actually, there is no single party that is right. The cost, I mean, the fee for the study is a factor that has impact and you can manipulate it, but still there is a range of other factors that will attract students to Poland. The cost of living, for example, and maybe luckily we do not have impact on it unless, again, we make the inflation boom. Poland is an attractive state also because it is relatively peaceful. Now in Washington, other universities in America, there are fights, students protesting against the Palestinian-Israel conflict, and the students are actually infuriated because they pay, but they are not able to complete their studies peacefully. In Poland, when you pay, you can study and graduate. So this is an aspect that we cannot manipulate, regardless of the fee. And now the students that we are talking about, those who got visas, okay, then again, it is a whole spectrum. There are those who got visas illegally because they hadn't had their A levels. There are those who got the visas, but they went to work in a different city that they were granted visas for. If somebody attends a university once a week and the university allows for that, it can be troublesome for Madam Minister, but as long as somebody studies, at least formally, not having been crossed out, they count as a student. There is an American student who will attend every day, will not work, and will write scholarly articles with their supervisor. That would be a dream situation. But in many places, the situation is multidimensional, and you need to bear in mind the multifaceted nature of each case, rather than look for one-size-fits-all solution. Very briefly, I would like to encourage you not to find ourselves non-attractive for the students from Western countries, but rather focus on what to do to become more attractive and to make our offer reach them. Hopefully the ministry will be helpful in that. Smart internationalization is what we will be supporting. What is not smart is what we are not going to support. But I would like to assure you that it is not drifting, it is not a revolution towards putting a halt to internationalization. We simply want to do it in a logical manner. And let me just end declaring that we will listen to your arguments attentively. Thank you for all the signals. I jotted them all down in my memory. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate, as we believe, is an opening debate for further discussion that will keep on going. I would like to thank the wonderful guests of this panel. Thank you very much for this participation.
Szanowni Państwo, dziękujemy bardzo. Prosimy jeszcze przez chwileczkę zostać na sali. Ten panel zamyka merytoryczną część pierwszego dnia kongresu, podczas którego dyskutujemy o kształcie krajowej strategii umiędzynarodowienia w obszarze szkolnictwa wyższego.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this part. Now please remain seated for a moment. This panel concludes the first day of the Congress during which we were discussing on the internationalization of higher education in Poland.
Dziękujemy Państwu, zarówno tym zgromadzonym w murach Centrum Medycyny Inwazyjnej Gdańskiego Uniwersytetu Medycznego, jak i tym, którzy oglądają część naszych paneli dyskusyjnych online, za aktywny udział w rozmowach.
We would like to thank you, both those gathered in the Center of Invasive Medicine of the Medical University of Gdańsk, as well as those who watched some of our discussion panels online, for your active participation in the conversations.
I teraz nadszedł czas na wspólne zdjęcie pamiątkowe. Także chciałabym Państwa poprosić, abyście powstali może. Państwa zaprosimy na widownię tym razem.
And now it's time for family photo, so please remain seated and the participants will join you.
Niech Państwo wstaną może.
Zjedziemy.